Okay, so I'll jump in. I'm going to first just talk a little bit about intimate deception and how I think about it, why it's such a challenge in marriage, and then what it might mean to grow beyond it. And then I will take up some of the case examples of some of the people that wrote in specific questions. But I'm just going to talk for a little bit first. So, so what is intimate deception? Well, the way I think about it is it's in a committed relationship when someone goes against the assumptions of that marriage, right? And masks information that they know their partner would want to know. Okay, this is very important. This is different between just not telling their spouse something and deception. Deception is you know your spouse would want to know it, and you are therefore keeping them from knowing it. And this could be financially, this can be sexually, this can be an affair, this can be pornography, this can be anything in which you are, this can be like spending money you don't want your spouse to know you're spending, hanging out with people you don't want them to know you're hanging out with. Okay. So there's a lot of ways we can deceive in marriage. And why do we do it? Well, one of the reasons that people do it is because, if you have taken my courses and heard me say a lot, that human beings, we want two things, right? I'm sure you could all say it. We want to belong to ourselves and we want to belong to a partner. And we want to have both things. And so when we have our fantasies about marriage and falling in love, our fantasies always include belonging to our own desires and the freedom to do things that really matter to us, and then locking in backup, okay, in a spouse. They're going to love us the whole way, admire, value, be grateful for all those things in us, and we'll finally lock in the love that we've deserved all along. That is often the fantasy of marriage and why we think marriage is going to make us happy. Now, what happens in marriage though is that you marry somebody who has the same fantasy. They have the same desire. I want to belong to you, but I also want to belong to my dreams, my endeavors, my hopes, my time schedule, my level of cleanliness, my desires around sexuality. And I want you to back me up if you love me. And so there's an inherent and how to say it, collision course when people get married, because if the marriage is going to be honest and there's not just one person that's always succumbing to the other, there is going to be a conflict of how much you get to have one or the other. And so what deception is in its core is the attempt to steal your partner's choices so that you can have the security, belong to the other, but belong to your own wishes, endeavors, and so on. So I want to do what I want to do sexually, and I want you to like me and feel good about me. That's often at the core of affairs. I want the security of home life. I don't want to fracture my family and the stability of a partner who cares about me, but I want to go get the validation that can come through a sexual affair or through the freedom that can come from spending money or doing with money what I want to do, but not let my spouse in on it because they're not going to like it and they're going to try and stop it. Okay. And so, the reason why we want to do this is we're kind of stealing our partner's ability to belong to themselves by deception. We're stealing their ability to know who the deceiver is and what their choices are, and then make their own choices in response or have their own reaction and invalidation towards the one who wants to mask information about themselves they know their partner won't be okay with. And so intimate deception is very, very disruptive when it's found out for many reasons. Um, and I think the primary one, let's just start with this, is the fact that this person that loves me, that says they are committed to me, that they're willing, that they're my eternal companion, right, has been willing to lie to me, okay, and it's arranged depending on anyone's situation, but lie to me about something significant, or lie to me over months of time, or lie to me over years of time, right? And that alone can be extremely disruptive for people. I thought I knew you, and I thought I knew you at least to be someone who wouldn't lie to me. And yet now I'm finding out something about you you didn't want me to know that's going to probably be dark enough that you can see why they wanted to hide it. And you've been willing to lie to me day after day after day, allowing me to assume one thing while another thing is true. And so that can be extremely disruptive. Now, of course, if it's an affair, and there are ranges in terms of impact of deception, of course. But if it's an affair, then there is the additional reality of what does it mean, right, that you brought your sexuality outside of the marriage? What does it mean that you didn't, that you were willing to go have a relationship on some level, whether only sexual and emotional, or just emotional, with someone else? And that is very challenging to one's sense of who they are. And then thirdly, I think it's very disruptive because it can, if you're thinking about it, challenge your own sense of your ability to track reality, right? So I've worked with people who, and on some level, are relieved because, hang on, switch, are relieved because they thought they were crazy. Like they kept getting signals, information that was pointing to deception. And then they would ask their spouse, and their spouse would be like, no, how could you even think that about me? And their spouse would, what's the word, mind twist. And then they would prefer the idea that they're just making up trouble, prefer the idea that they're crazy to the idea that their spouse is willing to lie to them and mind twist them. And so then the third crisis can be my own radar is not working, right? That I have some other desire that keeps me from tracking what is true, or makes it very difficult for me to stay focused on what is true. And so that can also be disruptive, because then when your spouse says, no, 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 I'm not doing it anymore, it's better, it's different, why don't you trust me? It can be very challenging to figure out, okay, am I believing them because I'm naive, or am I believing them because it's true? And, am I, um, am I even trustworthy to myself in my ability to assess what's up and down, what's true and not true? So let me just see if people have questions just about that content first. Let me see. Okay. Does anybody have any questions they want to put in the chat, or unmute and ask just about what I've said so far? Not specific situations or anything.
Jennifer, I have experienced this where I felt like there was definitely something off, but I
Yes.
had no evidence. And I just assumed that I was being super, suspicious or unreasonable. And then later when the truth came out, I did feel that relief of
Yeah, exactly.
and and when
Right.
that happened multiple times, it gave me data points where I really became to trust myself more.
Like the person I was thinking of, like the client, she felt relief for the same reason of the person that just spoke up. It's like, okay, I actually am getting signals that I need to lean into, and it's teaching them to trust their own gut more. Go ahead, the next person that was speaking up.
Can I follow that up with
Yeah, please.
another question? So now that I trust myself more, then when I feel like something's off and he still is just swearing up and down, there's nothing that he's not, done anything. I Now I tend to suspect him and then I feel guilty.
Mm,
And
yeah, it's
so,
definitely challenging.
and I think sometimes he honestly isn't really aware of what he's thinking and feeling. Like it's a case where I see him more clearly than he does.
Yes,
But
exactly.
I always tend to take kind of a wait and see and, figure eventually the truth will come out one way or the other.
Right. Good. I think it's a wise position. which is I'm tracking. So first of all, I think that's fair actually, that we track our partners and they track us better than we track ourselves around certain things. You know, we love the idea that we know our own minds best, but we don't. People can track when we're deceptive, anxious, dysregulated, trying to mask something. And when we don't want to see that in a partner, we can pretend with them that it's not there. But when you start to see it, you may be a step ahead of your spouse. You may track that they're starting to move back into a pattern of behavior beyond before they track it. But I do like the wait and see rather than what's wrong with me, but more, okay, I'm going to be honest, that's what I'm seeing. And I will wait for more data to emerge. Um, I think, guilt is an important point because I think we can sometimes feel like, so there's two thoughts I have about it. That the smeller's the feller. Do you know what I mean by that? This is something we used to say when I was growing up. It was a good one to but,
Yeah.
but the idea, like if you track it, that's you track something negative about another person, that is in fact true, that somehow that makes you the offender. Now that's different than if you're indulgent and punitive and you like to bring people down. Okay, that is offensive. But sometimes just tracking reality that both of you don't want to have be true is not offensive in the true sense of the word, even though it may hurt. And so, you want to be careful with guilt and not have it push you to not be honest. On the other hand, you do want to track yourself. Am I just taking refuge? I'm not saying that's about you, but we can do this in my partner's limitations. In there, like I can keep using this to say, I don't trust you yet. You haven't done enough yet. And there is an indulgence in it that is actually interfering with growth.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
I don't always trust myself. Sometimes I am indulgent, sometimes I am not in my right mind, and so I'm really hesitant to die on that hill.
Yeah. Well, it's a good caution to have, and I think it's wise that you are thinking about it. You want to go and keep contemplating. Am I stepping back from the best in me or the worst in me? Right?
Thank
Am
you.
I? Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay, let me just see what a few people wrote. How fair is it for the betrayer to say, if you had all those signs, you should have said something to me and I wouldn't have cheated? I mean, very unfair, I think. I mean, I think that's just more mind twisting. Now, that's more like, okay, it's your fault that I cheated on you. Now, I, there's maybe something to that idea that, if we delude ourselves, how to say it, marriages, organizations, families, systems need checks and balances in the sense that, you do your spouse a favor in some ways to stay honest because it helps them stay honest. And so that's true. We have an impact on our marriages. We have an impact on the people around us. But to say you should have told me is like prima facie evidence of somebody who's not taking responsibility for themselves. Let's just talk a little bit about what does growth look like? Well, you know, affairs, deception, it's tempting stuff, okay? And we have quite a range of reactivity to affairs because they're horrifying. Nobody wants to have a partner cheat on them. It's a devastating, devastating reality. On the other hand, if most of us are honest, we can recognize the part of us that would like the security of family and marriage and the validation of other people, right? Whether that's emotional or sexual validation or both. And so it's an easy thing to be lulled towards. And so humans, we like to be liked, we like to be validated, we like to be told we're attractive, we like to be wanted. And marriage cannot compete with what is outside of marriage in the superficial sense, because you can get cheap and easy validation outside of marriage much more readily than someone who really knows you. And so it's easy to do. I have worked with people who wake up to themselves in the light of the revelation, and they are in a crisis, not just in the marriage. Well, the ones that change, okay, they are in a crisis not just in the marriage, but they're in a crisis with themselves. How could I have become this person? How could I be like this? Um, I worked with somebody years ago where he was cheating and sort of flagrantly cheating, and he assumed he had all the power because she was dependent economically, and he kind of misread her that she would put up with it, basically. And he had colleagues who were doing this kind of thing, and he just thought he could get away with it. And he liked her validation, her crying, her wanting him to be faithful, and the validation he could get outside the marriage. And then her integrity and her self-respect came into place, and she said, I would rather live in a barn than live in this misery. And so she stood up and filed for, got divorce papers in order and filed for divorce. And he went into complete crisis. But importantly, I mean, initially he tried to go into trying to get her to come back and don't do it. And how dare you? And how dare you tell me I can't, be in the same house where my kids are and all these things. But when he could see that he couldn't browbeat her back into position like he had been able to for so long, he went into full crisis with himself. And he was just like almost unable to function at work, unable to do anything. I was working with him. I said, would you like to consider going on some anti-anxiety medication? Because he was so overwhelmed. And his father had died years before. And he was like, my father would not have been this man. And I've let my success and my, arrogance kind of hijack the best in me. And I'm so disgusted with who I've become, as was his wife. But the point is he's like, no, I don't want to be on anti-anxiety med. I want to feel it because I need it to change who I've become. And he said to his work, I'm not going to do anything after hours anymore. If you need to fire me, I get it. I would prefer to be fired than to have to do this anymore. But that was a man and a marriage that changed. She eventually invited him to move back in after about 9 months. And they had their rough spots when he moved back in still, because she would kind of have flashbacks and anxiety and so on. But he was a man who was dealing with himself, which is very different than other situations that I've worked with, where the person that cheated is upset that the loyal spouse is upset, like they don't want the anger, they don't want the invalidation, they don't want the questions, the doubt. And one person had been unfaithful and in a certain context where she had met this guy, and they as a couple still had to go back to that context. Okay. And he was just so upset, and she was completely unfeeling about, I can't believe you can't trust me, I can't. And there was no reason for her to be trustworthy yet, because she hadn't been repentant, only upset that there were consequences to being found out. And so that's kind of the spectrum of where people. So a lot of the questions that come in are like, my spouse is saying that they're honest now and that they're better and so on, and I want to believe them, but I don't know if it's real. And what I would say as a general rule is, when your spouse, this is a general rule, okay, and this doesn't mean in every moment you're clear, but you can tell that they are changing because they are in crisis with themselves, and they are not trying to manage how you feel about them. They're not trying to manage if you trust them. They're not trying to manage if you what you think. They're trying to manage how they feel about themselves and whether or not they are dealing with the core of who they are. So just another example of this was a couple where there had been infidelity. He'd gone through all of the church hoops and everything and gotten that stamp of approval, but was still hiding aspects of who he was. She struggled to trust him for years after that. Um, they came in to see me with ostensibly a trust issue, that she had a trust issue. And then as I started to ask questions, it, and I think this was a man who was tired of being trapped by his own lies. It just started to come out that really, truly nothing had changed. It had been an ongoing issue and that she wasn't crazy for her lack of trust. And so I think, he went into full crisis. And it, the time before when she was trying to regulate it, she's calling the bishop, she's calling, different organizations to help him with his compulsive sexual behavior and so on. And she's trying to lead him into the behavior. In the second situation, she said, I'm done. Marriage is over. And the marriage didn't end up ending in this situation. And for good reasons, it didn't. But he did all of the calling. He was saying to me, will you work with me? Will you help me? He was going and he just said, I do not care who knows. There's nothing I'm going to mask at this point. I have to get healthy. And that's a person that's going to get healthy if they stay true to themselves. So, um, but you see, that doesn't mean that the wife in that situation couldn't ever wonder or doubt that there's a lot of data that this person is willing to deal with themselves and they're willing to deal with the impact of their behavior on a partner. Christy, do you see any in there that are just on point? I don't know if you've been following them. The questions that are coming in, I just don't know if I want to spend time reading them. Is there anything like right on point here that you can?
I can read. I don't know if I'm going to be on point for you, but
Sure.
how do you distinguish between disinterest, disconnection because of overload, or just a lot going on in your life for your partner from disconnection that ties to deception?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to kind of trust your gut a little bit and look for the data. There's yeah, it's a good point because I think what you're saying is there's like this sense of like I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but this is what I hear in it. Like I don't really know my partner's mind. I don't really know where they are or why they're disconnected. There's a mask. There's something that's kind of untrackable about my partner. And that doesn't mean that, oh, I know that they're being unfaithful or something, but it does mean there's something in the marriage that needs addressing. Because, you know, what's striking to me in working with couples is how much room there is to deceive because of how much disconnection there is in the marriage. And that there's often living in kind of different worlds, not really friends. And so there's plenty of latitude to create other connections in. And so it's worth inquiring more. It's worth trying to understand what's in the silence or the disconnection. And, you know, one of the reasons why we can be afraid to ask is we don't want to see things maybe that are there, but we also maybe don't want to see ourselves through our partner's eyes. Either because we are complicit in a bad marriage or a marriage that they're not happy in, or because it shows us something about our partner we don't want to see or know about them, about who they are. Okay, anything else, Christy, in there that you think I should?
Yeah, I think this is a one that I saw come up kind of often was how do you balance boundaries for safety after betrayal versus just trying to control and stay in a one-up self-righteous position because it feels less vulnerable?
Oh yeah, we could do a whole Facebook Live on this, because it's really an easy place and a justifiable place to go, which is in this kind of superior, I don't trust you. And of course, initially, there's a lot of sense in saying there's not a basis for trust, right? Initially, there's not meaning it would be dumb to trust at this point because all the data points in one direction. And so I'm not ready to trust. But then there's a certain point in which one can almost feel, if they're being honest with themselves, and I don't think this is always clear because often I'm trying to figure out which one is it right now. But you know your partner's bringing the best. You know they really want to step back towards it. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but they really are trying to be a better person and it's true. Okay, that's option one. I'm going to go with option two in a second too in a minute. And you're kind of up at a decision point, and it's an important one, and it's easy to avoid making the decision that you're now up against, which is, am I going to reinvest with this person that has disappointed me, that has lied to me, that is capable of deceiving me? I mean, like, they maybe have even grown and changed a lot, but they were willing to leave Honesty Island. So, seeing that they are capable of doing it, am I willing to reinvest with this person, even if they've changed a lot? And it's a real and important question. Is there enough good here that I want to step back towards them and they want it also? And, usually when that happens, it's the marriage has grown up. It's not just the one who lied or deceived. It's that, yes, that person has been addressing their deception, has been speaking more honestly about themselves in the marriage, dealing with their ability to take advantage, dealing with the ways that they have masked who they are. But their partner is also looking at themselves in the old dynamic, not that they caused an affair, but that they were operating in a less mature marriage, and they are willing to grow into a more mature one by looking at themselves too. And those are the couples that make it. It's not that they duct tape a bad marriage back together. Some people do that, of course, and they live resentfully ever after. But when somebody uses an affair to actually grow, right, they have evolved into a more solid marriage and into more solid people, and they use that crisis to grow themselves up. And it's a painful growth process. And intimate deception is a painful way to learn, but it's often a very powerful way to wake up a couple and to grow them into people more capable of love and more capable of fidelity and more conscious about what it is to really choose another person and to really choose a marriage. And so the person that was deceived, right, they are choosing in a context of recognizing, I don't have full control of my partner, and I don't know if he or she is going to continue to be honest, but I can, out of my own integrity, I can't control that, but I can figure out who I've been. And if I believe I want to love this person better, I want to be invested in this marriage in a better way, then out of your integrity, you're choosing again. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't, that you go to sleep or that you don't stay awake to data that you need. I think even the most committed, trusting people are not turning that responsibility off to themselves, right? They're staying aware of, who is my partner and are they honest with me? And is there data that would suggest they're not? And do I know them? And do I let them know me? Am I bringing my best? Are they bringing their best? You're staying open. It's an open and ongoing question. And it's not just a one-time decision and then you have no choices left. You continue to have choices. You just want to make sure you don't live in the indulgent. Christy's been helping me come up with new losing strategies. We all do them, but Christy just jokes that she's the expert at them. But one of them is this idea of straddling, right? That we can imagine we're keeping our options open by staying in the marriage but not really choosing it. By like telling our spouse we're going to be all over the marriage and choose it as soon as they never make a mistake again. Okay. And it's a way of trying to hedge, but then costing ourselves a lot in the process of doing that, because we are sucking the life out of the marriage at the same time that we're saying we're all for it if only the other person would get better. We're actually precluding the marriage getting better at a certain point in that progression. So I can't say it's exactly in this moment, but you have to look at a good therapist or coach is helpful for helping you track, am I taking advantage by leaning out and not taking the risk of asserting an actual choice, I want fully in or I want fully out. Okay, let me just go to some of the questions that came in. So this person says, how can I work through my betrayal trauma enough to not get super triggered by things that feel like, or maybe actually are, signs that my spouse isn't working their sex addiction recovery or not working it enough? I want to get to a point where being triggered by that doesn't inhibit me from showing up as the kind of person and wife I want to be. So let me just think about this a little more. How can I work through my betrayal trauma enough to not get super triggered by things? So one way, the reason why we get triggered, right, and so on, is because is at its core the feeling that there's two things. There's loss, okay, which you're never gonna. I mean, loss gets easier over time, but the loss is there. And then I think the second trigger is the feeling of powerlessness, right? That my spouse is going to control my happiness. My spouse is going to control, um, whether or not I am loved and secure. And I think that when the challenging thing in marriage, going back to that core principle of belonging to ourselves and belonging to others, is that um, is that when we're in marriage, we are letting somebody really impact our happiness and really impact our life. And it's completely fair that you want your spouse to be trustworthy because they have so much control, in a sense, because you're married to them, over your happiness. And so it's easy to be triggered by the fact that they're not dealing with something. They don't seem to be addressing something sufficiently, or they seem to be saying they're doing enough, but really they're not. And you can't make them do more. There's going to be grief and loss, and that just takes some time to overcome. But I think one way to help yourself is when the mind believes it's trapped, it gets triggered. Okay. It's that limbic brain that is trying to get a sense of control and safety. And when it feels like it doesn't have it, you just can spin, and you're looking often for ways to get them to do the right thing, get them to do something. And so reminding yourself, or getting to a place through working with a coach or a therapist, around that you really do have choices. Now, they may not be the choices you want. The choice you want is your spouse is faithful and deals with themselves and deals with their sexual compulsivity, or whatever the challenge is. But I can't, I have to know in myself that that is on them to decide. That is their choice. And I have choices, and I know what I will do if they do not deal with it. And I'm not saying you're saying that to manipulate them and control them and tell them, remember, I'm going to leave if you don't go to your meetings, or I don't mean that. I mean that you actually know in your heart that you will choose otherwise if they don't address their problematic behavior. And as sad as that is, as heartbreaking as that is, it is still the path of your dignity and your clarity that you will at least control the terms of your participation. You will at least control what kind of relationship you're willing to be in. Now, that's a lot harder. I mean, very few of us want to think about self-defining. We want to just get our spouse to do what they're supposed to do. And, we love agency when it's for us, but we don't love agency when it's for our spouse, and it affects our happiness. And so our limbic brain is usually trying to just get us to browbeat our partner into the shape we want them to be, rather than dealing with who they are and who we're going to be in the face of that. And so it's a kind of a paradoxical reality in marriage, is the more you know that you won't betray yourself to be in a marriage, the happier you'll be in it. And to be trustworthy to yourself is foundational to being able to track and ascertain trustworthiness in another person. Now, of course, these things are easier to say than to do, because it's very, very hard. It takes a lot of differentiation to walk away from a marriage and to walk away from a person who's not willing to do their part. But because there's so much loss connected to it. But I think on some level, trusting yourself that you will. I remember, I've told the story before, but when I was, I was really ambivalent about getting married because I just had grown up learning that like a good woman turns herself over to a man and basically supports him. And she finds her value through being a great backup, right? And I just didn't, I just felt this would not go well for me, that it was a way of putting myself in a position to be devalued and dependent. And so I wanted to be married, but I was afraid of the inherent vulnerability of it. And so, I straddled, okay, for a while. And I finally was like, I can't straddle anymore. It's like costing me my happiness, my self-respect. I have to choose one way or the other. And so I fully chose in with John. And it was the day before our wedding. And I remember just going into a kind of mini crisis of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all my freedom as of tomorrow morning. Like, I'm going to be trapped. And all the kind of old fears that had been sort of put to bed were now kind of reemerging. And I just remember sort of in this contemplative time, I was just really thinking. And I just remember being clear with myself that, like, I love John. I feel very confident about the choice I'm making. And I don't believe he'll betray that trust. And if he ever does, if he ever becomes unworthy of this choice on my part, then I reserve the right to choose otherwise. Like that I won't betray my well-being to be in a marriage, not in any fundamental way. And some people say, well, that means that's a really weak commitment and so on. But I don't think of marriage as committing to a partner. I think of marriage as committing to God to bring your best self. And letting yourself be taken advantage of by another person is not virtuous. It does not serve the good. And so it's a way of saying, I won't betray myself here, and I won't betray the other either. And I will make it worth their while to the best of my ability to really bring my best self here. That's the commitment of marriage, of a good marriage. So that infuses it with a freedom. And I think these questions get more punctuated and real in the face of infidelity than in any other time. Like, what does it mean to stay? And is this just me with a baseless hope, or is this a grounded hope and a grounded investment, even though it takes a lot of courage to walk it? I think walking that path of post infidelity of some kind can really pull for the greatest courage in people, because the invalidation of it all is huge. And so you have to find something more real and more solid in yourself and in your partner if you're going to make it. And the ones that make it and make it into a better marriage, that's exactly what they do. Okay, let me go back to the questions here. My husband told, now this is a good one. It's just a little bit less extreme, but it kind of hits on a lot of these points. My husband told me 2 weeks ago, after 15 years of marriage, that he had broken the law of chastity as a teenager. And for anyone who's not LDS on here, that means that he had, well, I don't know if he had sex as a teenager, but he was very sexual as a teenager. Let's see what she says. He didn't have intercourse, but did pretty much everything else you can think of many times. This was during a 1.5-year relationship that was off and on. He had fully repented and talked with the bishop once earlier on for lesser offenses, and again at the end. He said at some point between then and his mission, he had decided that nobody else ever needs to know that he was that he maybe wasn't clean. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to go back. He decided that nobody else ever needs to know that he was clean through the atonement and was a new person in Christ. That the boy who did those things is not the same person as the person he is now. He said he's never felt guilt for not telling me, that he hasn't ever considered or thought about or debated doing so all these years, not even before we got married, like it was irrelevant. He said that the only reason he told me recently is, one, he wants me to know where he's coming from as we teach our kids about sex, and two, listening to some things that JFF has said made him think maybe it's a good idea for him to do it, not from a guilt mindset, but just that it might allow me to know him on a deeper level. Day one was painful. I cried all day. I've slowly been healing, but it still might take a long time to fully get there. I'm kicking myself for not asking, but it honestly never occurred to me, maybe because subconsciously I knew he would say something if there was something to tell. My husband said, of course, he would have told me if he had intercourse, but it feels to me like what he did do and what he didn't do were so close. Why were his responses so far apart? The of course I would tell you versus of course I'm not going to tell. Doesn't feel doesn't it feel kind of obvious to tell a fiance about prior pornography addiction? Is that so much more offensive than an actual physical intimate relationship with someone? And maybe there are people out there who feel it's unnecessary to ever divulge intercourse. I guess I'm looking for someone to validate my feeling of being deceived, even though I still trust him that he didn't feel like he was being deceitful. Sometimes I think I'm crazy and tell myself, why are you making such a big deal about this? Maybe this happens all the time to people. Maybe this is normal and I'm being overly sensitive. Maybe he really had no moral obligation to tell me. And I also want to shout from the rooftops, if you're in a serious relationship that could lead to engagement, tell them about your prior history of intimacy. Or if you have been married for 15 years and have failed to tell them now. I don't know if you agree with me. That's why I'm asking the question. Okay. I remember having a client who was afraid and getting data that his wife was cheating. And he found out she had some bank account that he didn't know about. And so this is a completely different level here, but I'm just going to tell for a second. And he said, I want to see that account. And she's like, no, I don't want to show you that account. And she was hedging, I guess. I don't know if she was that direct. And she's like, why do you want to see it? And he said, because you don't want to show me. Right. And so this gets back to this core idea of like intimate deception is when you know your partner wants to know something and you mask it to take away their choices. Now, what's interesting about this question for me is that it seems that the husband is saying, it genuinely did not occur to me that this was information that was significant enough. And the wife is saying, how could you not know that that would matter to me? And it's hard for me to know, like, does the husband actually, is he lying about that? Or did he genuinely think, because it sounds like the question points in the direction he genuinely didn't think, oh, I'm doing a bad thing by not telling her about the specifics of what I did with a prior girlfriend. And I think there is some support in LDS thinking, like if you've repented of something, it's as if it's wiped clean and nobody else needs to know. And I have worked with people who have used that idea to say it's as if it never happened. And it sounds like that's the way the husband thought about it. What I think is kind of problematic about that idea in general, and why we probably shouldn't teach it, that idea, is because even if you're thinking in a sin model, okay, the sin has been washed away, that's different than these are experiences that were a part of my life and that shaped who I am. And therefore, if I want to be in an honest, forthright marriage, why would I not share it? So I do wonder if the wife in this situation, part of her struggle with this is, you're masking information that is kind of pretty important about your life experiences. And why did you not let me in on it? I think she's also having a reaction because, at least for her, and maybe it's different for him, that's just a spectrum of difference that's not that significant because it was sexually intimate. And for him, in his mind, there's a bigger distinction to be made, and that intercourse was a much, much bigger deal than, fooling around, so to speak. And so that's probably how he sees it. And she's like, no, this is like so close that it feels as though you've masked something really legitimate to me. So I think there is a difference in this situation of interpretation that's probably honest on both sides, but has the marriage and the wife in a meaning crisis of you know, there's something about you not telling me, and there's something about the fact that that's in fact real, that's disrupted my sense of who we are as a couple, and it hurts. So it hurts because it feels like I've been left out of something and not been free to know you. Because one thing I would also say is, teaching this idea that something's been wiped clean. It's like, if it's actually been wiped clean, then why would you not talk about your experience? That is to say, if it has no moral weight on you anymore, to use kind of that thinking, why would you not talk to your life partner, your intimate partner, about your experiences and what's brought you to be who you are? And so I think this idea of masking and hiding, even if husband came by this honestly, is a way of saying we still are ashamed of it, right? That we still are trying to mask and put away something because we need to just bury it and pretend it's not there. And so, yeah. Okay. Christy, any questions coming in that I should hear? I'm sorry to have you do that, but it would be helpful just because there's so many.
Yeah, sure. How can the betrayer respond if the betrayed is stuck in the straddling position, unwilling to deal with the issue, unwilling to choose trust, and unwilling to leave the marriage because of other reasons not related to choosing the betraying spouse again?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the response would be, I understand. I mean, I'm not trying to feed people lines here, but I'm just going to give them mindset. That I understand why it's so hard to step towards me, given that I've been willing to deceive and that I have hurt you so much. And I recognize you may never want to do it. So this is how I would be thinking about it if I were in the betraying position. I think I would be thinking I can see that we could easily be in the pattern of you leaning out, but not wanting the marriage to actually be a marriage and also not end. And I can see how tempting that is to do that because you don't want a marriage to end because we have children. But you also maybe don't want a marriage with me either. And I really want a marriage with you. And I understand the fear of stepping towards me, but I am committed to being your partner and a good partner, not just co-raising our children. And I will be honest with you. I am 100% committed to it. And I'm asking you to step back in and to not take this, what seems safer, but ultimately is very unsafe for us, path. So that's what I'd say. If I had my wits about me and I were in that position. Okay.
You want me to read one more?
Let me just quickly look. Yeah, why don't we do that since we won't have time for another question? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Intimate deception to not have to be emotional, intimate, sexual. This disconnection, hiding, cloaking feels like reverse infidelity. I feel trapped with someone who doesn't want the relationship, but hides that for all it's worth. And then he has a few questions underneath. How can I confront myself about addressing the cloaking and deception? How can I regularly bring it up to my spouse without being naggy or sounding like a song on repeat? How can I escalate the issue when nothing is changing? What does a soft start look like to let them know that the escalation is coming without sounding like an ultimatum or threatening?
Okay. And I don't know if this person has enough privacy to do this, but can you give me an example of what you mean by this cloaking, masking? I think what you're saying, let me just see if I've got it, but I would love an example so I can better see it, is that this is a person that's sort of in the marriage, but in name only, but they're not, they don't actually want a marriage. And
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
okay.
You know, I would say that as long as the engagement is like on their terms, the things they're interested in, the people that they like, you know, those sorts of things, then everything's okay. If it flips any towards myself or the things I'm interested in, then those things are kind of like, why are you doing that? Can't you stop doing that? You know, those kind of things kind of shut off. And then when I express my desires and needs in the relationship, I usually get like maybe a promise or maybe nothing. And if there's a promise, that promise usually isn't followed through, or there's no sort of sustainment of any sort of movement towards like trying to build a closer relationship or a more connected relationship. It just stays
Yeah.
at like, I have my
So this is
things.
what what I would say is, based on what you're saying, that your spouse doesn't want, she wants backup. She doesn't want to share a life. Now, a lot of us are in marriages where one person wants backup and the other one backs up the person. Okay. But that's different than sharing a life.
Right.
It's different than I'm invested in your happiness and you're invested in my happiness. And how do we create that? And so I
But
think
it's so low key, it's hard to put your finger on. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, but you're living it and you know it. And
Yeah.
based on what you're saying, anyway, I'm not here to say I know that you
No,
have the
you're
right
right.
view,
No,
but
you're right.
right, but
I'm just
but it
saying
sounds, yeah,
it's
it
subtle.
sounds like, yeah, it's subtle. And because you're just doing it the way you've been doing it, and she's happy enough and probably like, don't rock the boat. I mean, or I'll make some promises, but what I would say is she probably feels like he complains once in a while, but I don't really want to change anything. And with him, I don't have to.
For sure.
So with him, he gets resentful, maybe feels covertly superior, maybe,
Yep.
but he's, you know, anxious enough about displeasing me. I'm just making these things up, but I'm imagining this,
That's
that
fine.
I can just kind of keep doing what I want to do and kind of roll my eyes at him and push back his complaints. And so the reason why I'm saying that is that it's a systemic issue where your wife doesn't yet believe that she would need to do differently with you.
Yeah, and that's why I worded the question about like how do I escalate beyond just like white knuckling it as long as I can and then bringing it up and then doing that on repeat over and over.
I just don't know if I would use the word escalate. I get what you're asking. It's not about you manipulating the situation to get your wife on alert. That's
Absolutely.
just not the goal.
Yep.
Because there's already too much manipulation in the marriage and it's not going to solve anything. And it's trackable as a manipulation if that's what it is. It's about you deciding whether or not you're going to keep being okay or tolerating or accommodating being in second place. Now, I don't mean that you should just turn into a bully. I don't mean that, you start going after your wife as the offender that you've got to take down. I mean, you change your own behavior in a system in which you don't have to be taken seriously. And it doesn't come from trying to get your wife to take you seriously. It comes from something inside you and standing up in a different way. And so sometimes when I'm like, people are saying, well, how would you say this? It's really difficult because it's not the words, it's the person. They're in a stronger position.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Sadly, the only way I know how to do that is kind of like to build contempt inside where I kind of wall myself off. And I would
exactly.
prefer not to do that. I prefer to somehow
Yes.
stay connected and yet give a good, I mean, yeah, let's
Well-
take going for walks. Like I invite her to go for walks all the time, never wants to go for walks with me. You know, I mean, that's just one example, but I try
Exactly.
to engage these things and they don't happen. So I go on walks myself. And then I come back and I say, that hurt to go on a walk myself.
Okay, right. Exactly. And she's like, wow, my husband's such a complaining, whiny person that's hard to be attracted to and respect, right? What I'm trying to say is you move into resentment, but that's not about integrity and standing up. That's about accepting the status quo and holding her responsible for it rather than holding yourself responsible for your participation in it.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
And so I'll just say one more thing about it is that you are a full chooser in your life. You know, I've worked with a couple where he's resentfully accommodated his wife for years, and he just the resentment was just so thick, so deep. And you know, he was the higher desire person for sex, but he was just like a bag of resentment. I mean, he was just like, you know, so even though he was supposedly wanted more connection, what he really wanted was for her to validate him in a way that she never had, but that he made very easy for her to never do. And the marriage started to get stronger when he stopped letting himself get away with that and starting to take more responsibility for his choices. Do I really want to love this person? Do I want to love her, or do I not want to? Do I want to choose out or choose in? And, you know, so again, I could take any one of these and speak for a couple hours on each of them, which is actually going to take us to my surprise. Yeah, the big surprise, is that how we said it, Christy? But the big news is I am going to be doing a full course on intimate deception, affairs, you know, how one can understand themselves as either the one who's betrayed or the betrayer, and how marriages can grow. And so, Christy, tell me what else I should say about it.
Well, you're first going to do a mini course, like
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right. Christy and I made a bunch of decisions today about, or I mean, last week about a bunch of things, and I can't remember all of them, but that's right. So we're going to first do a mini course, which will later turn into a larger course, but we're going to get something out there that's a little bit shorter and more digestible. Sometimes because the projects feel so big, I sort of don't get to them. And this is a way of getting to it because a lot of people have asked for it. So we are going to be doing that, posting. Hopefully that will be completed in the next month or two, but we will let you know when it's available for those who want to learn more and kind of more resources that are out there. But anything else, Christy, before I stop?
Yeah, no, that was masterful. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm excited to be able to have this as a resource for people.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.